There's 3 buttons on this microphone, and one's like a low pass filter and a
I don't
high
even.
pass filter.
I don't even know what those things mean. What is a low pass filter? What does it do?
Low basically. Watch, this will be the one time I totally fuck it up. Low pass means the low end may pass. Basically, the low end gets to play.
So it makes people sound bassier.
Right.
Okay.
High pass is something you throw a high pass on something you want to make sound like someone's on the phone on the other end of the line.
Right. That kind of tinny. You take out all of the normal range.
Yeah. And then I think high shelf and low shelf are the opposite. So you want to shelf the lows. Like a low shelf would be shelf the low, like low, cut the lows out.
Okay.
And the high shelf would be. So I don't know why you wouldn't just call it the opposite, but I guess it makes sense because you want to keep the mid range.
What's the difference between a low shelf and a high pass? Because those sound like they do more or less the same thing.
Maybe it's because you're cutting off like the useless end of the spectrum that humans can't really hear.
Oh, okay.
I think on both ends of it, maybe.
But it sort of gets rid of some of the noise too.
Yeah.
I actually went to a mix on Crazy X Monday, I think, and it was my first mix I gone to this season. And I was talking to the sound editors and the mixers in there, and I was just like, I went to film school, and we have to get like a general education on all aspects of filmmaking, including sound. And sound was the one thing
that no one really ever teaches.
No, they taught it, and a lot of people were very interested in it. But it's the thing that I just don't understand. I can look at a waveform and not know what the fuck I'm looking at.
I guess I actually feel pretty lucky with how much they taught us about sound. They actually taught us Pro Tools, how to noise reduce like wave files and stuff like that, so you just get rid of the hissing and the humming in the background, which I've completely forgotten. If you've listened to this podcast, you know that.
Forgotten, or are you just kind of skipping it to get it done?
I'm doing it, but it's just kind of like, oh well, this sounds all right, okay. So I run a mild a mild noise reduction pass on our podcast before it's released. So
yeah,
because I don't want
sort of the default.
I don't want to really get into it too much, but yes, the world of sound is like. How did we get on the topic of sound? It's like one of the most.
How did we get on it? We were talking about the mics.
So, well, okay, since you're assistant editing now,
yeah,
the one thing I've noticed every assistant have to do is really do a pretty substantial audio mix to post the episodes. Like, so when your editor's done with their episode, you're not done, but as they're working, you kind of have to lay the sound effects and everything, don't you?
Yeah, my current editor is kind of funny. He'll do a lot of the sound work himself, and we don't really concern ourselves with the mix unless something's plain inaudible.
Sure.
Like it's
but these are still episodes that have to be posted for the network to review.
Yeah, like we still need to put in a good faith effort in making it presentable and stuff. If anything stuck out as, oh no, this is not good, we're recording ADR to replace lines, we're doing all kinds of stuff. Some shows are worse than others as far as how much you need to mix the show beforehand. On Preacher, the bar was set much higher.
Yeah.
Like I was almost expecting we were going to have to mix it in surround.
Oh wow.
But we didn't have to, thankfully. But it was like when I interviewed for the job, the editor was like, oh yeah, they're going to be asking a lot. Which means he was going to be asking a lot. It
is funny. Like I'm noticing that now between, the job I'm on now versus like the one I was on before, and like the levels of discrepancy on how each production really operates.
Yeah. The showrunners on Crazy X, who anybody can look up and know what I'm talking about. Like their main concern on Crazy X is the musical portions and how funny the show is.
Right.
And occasionally like how well the drama is playing off.
Is it a serial or is it?
Meaning like there's
is there a
plot line to follow? Yeah. Yeah, it's not an Alien of the Week type show.
Aw.
but their priorities are in other places. So as long as they can watch the show and not be distracted by how bad the sound is,
Sure.
or how bad some temp visual effects are. Holy cow! The experience I got on House of Cards with you, by the way, has just been paying off over and over again.
Just
Because I'm doing
because-
split screens, I'm doing like head comps inside Avid.
Yeah.
And when apparently I was just told that when they get to online, or they get to the final playback, and some visual effects still aren't done from Encore or whatever,
They'll just keep
the people are going like, "What do you mean this isn't done? This looks fine to me. This looks great." So I'm like, I'm doing a better job.
By head comp, you mean basically they've replaced the head, like the body's staying so still, or you tracked it on.
Yeah, I track it on.
You
Yeah.
literally are cutting a circle around the head from another.
Yeah,
take
and just putting a
pasting it.
feathered selection around it to
Yeah.
move this head into place. Yeah.
I mean, House of Cards, we did those. They weren't as common as they. I mean, you'd probably have under 10 per season. But yeah, I've noticed the same thing actually, especially when, like, while I'm cutting like the Australia film, I've noticed like everything I've learned from working on House of Cards and all that After Effects work and understanding how you can do stuff with visual effects. I'm taking stuff that was like literally B-roll and turning it into a real take by adding a performance that I want.
Putting in some
Into there was, for example, like one shot. There's the actress she was tired, and like she's supposed to go to the door and answer the door and let this guy in. She doesn't really know, but he's flown from America, and she's best friends with his now ex or whatever. And there's this B-roll shot where I was just rolling camera because I thought the shot looked cool, and she's just standing there with her like hand on the door handle with her head like just like staring at the floor, you know. But her eyes were open, and you could see through the door. She was just waiting there for me to say action so she could open the door, and the actor would be like step forward and step into frame.
Yeah.
But I took a take of the actor stepping forward and put him behind the glass so you could see him walking forward while she's standing there with the door.
Yeah, yeah.
And I closed her eyes. I replaced her eyeballs so where her eyelids were shut, so she's just standing there with her eyes shut. And then had timed it so that when she looked up to open the door, he was like had already stepped up to the door, and I added a little knock and sound effects, and then suddenly you've got a take that didn't exist.
Right, made almost from whole cloth.
Almost entirely, yeah, from visual effects. And that was all stuff that, you know, you and I learned just from basically just learning how to track and even stabilize and do visual effects that are very simple and whatnot.
Yeah.
And that whole technique has just been something that I've been using. It's changed like how it's amazing. It's incredible. Like, and now that I'm on a new job where people don't necessarily know visual effects or know what can be done, it's interesting to see how different the process is, and how not that it's just a different style. It's not good, better or worse. It's just
Yeah, and like part of me is very glad a lot of directors in TV aren't asking for that stuff, because it does take time.
Sure.
Like my job is busy enough without having to do that. 100 shots per episode. Now I go through and I kind of stabilize ones that I think need it or whatever, or if like the camera is obviously not quite doing what they wanted it to do,
right,
pointing a little too high or something like that.
Well, then people would argue sometimes that what we learned on that show was too perfect, and you're perfecting something that shouldn't necessarily be perfected.
Yeah, you got to pay attention to the context on the show. If it's sort of a chaotic scene where people are acting crazy, hey, crazy ex-girlfriend, then you don't necessarily want it to be a perfectly frozen camera,
right,
and like cold and detached. You want it to be in the moment.
Did you ever have a struggle? Because sometimes they would say, you know, we don't want you to stabilize this thing, and sometimes I'd come back and say, well, actually, like, I don't know if maybe that's too obvious, because it is kind of like how often do you watch a movie and the whole movie is like set on sticks, and then the one obvious scene is no longer on, like it's suddenly handheld,
Right.
and it's kind of like when you're watching a scene and suddenly the music drops out and you're like, oh god, someone's gonna die in a horror film.
Yeah, it projects
it's like
its
it projects
intentions.
itself, and it's the same can be said with the camera moves. I don't know. I always had that struggle, like, especially because on House of Cards, like, you basically had full control of what the motion of the shot was.
Yeah.
You had the DP team and the camera team shooting the show, and then
Well, what was it like? They shot at a really large resolution, but there was sort of a collar around the whole thing. There was a
Yeah.
border that gave you a lot of leeway in where you can move the take.
House of Cards. In the beginning, when I started on House of Cards, they were shooting on the old red MX, which was a 5K image, and they were doing they were only using the center 4K of the image, which would give you that border around the edge of all this extra unused frame that if you wanted to reframe something or stabilize, you could.
Yeah.
And
Without having to blow up.
eventually that became 6K with the next camera, and it was a center 5K extraction. But then they would take that center 5K and rescale it down to 4K, and that's what they would deliver to Netflix.
Yeah, I don't think 5K masters really are a thing.
No,
They pretty much
yeah,
stick
there's
with
really no
HD
reason.
or
I
4K.
mean,
Maybe 2K. but-
it'll be I knock on wood. It'll be a while, I think, before they go from 4K to say 8K TVs.
Yeah, I know
I hope.
like they've made them already, but they're not for consumer use, of course.
I feel like there's really no reason. Like looking at, I mean, I say that now, but of course, when you look at the difference, like just the camera that I shot on as an 8K camera for the Australian film, and I'm noticing, especially when talking about like creating new shots. Like I'm not a big fan of like punching in on zooming in because you're digitally zooming in.
Right, all you're doing is blowing up the size
You're
of
blowing
pixels.
up the size, but I'm doing it a lot on the Australian film and creating new shots when I don't really necessarily believe in that kind of. I believe just set up the camera and shoot it again.
Well,
But
I
in
guess
this kind of case,
when you're shooting at such a high resolution,
Yeah.
and most people are gonna only be watching it in 1080p, you can't tell the difference
when you're
until you
outputting
blow it up
4K,
4 times up.
when you're outputting it 4K, you're still downscale. Like if I was using the full 8K image and just resizing it down to 4K, you're not necessarily zooming in on it. You're actually compressing it down.
Right, you're actually losing pixels in that case.
Yeah. So it's it's interesting because 8K allows for so much room. Anyway, I suppose we should actually. This is actually a pretty good segue into we're doing the movie Zodiac today,
A Fincher film,
a Fincher film.
which uses a lot of these techniques, right?
Is a lot of these techniques just because I've been working in house in his building on various shows that he's doing, including Mindhunter, which would have, by the time this releases, would have come out the Friday before, the 13th.
Okay. Oh, I thought it was like the 28th or something.
It comes out Friday the 13th, Netflix.
Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun. This episode should release on that Tuesday. Next after that, so was that like the 17th or something?
Right, okay. So people will have a chance to watch Mindhunters, and
And,
it is not a TV remake of the Val Kilmer movie. And I hope somebody knows what the fuck I'm talking about.
Me too.
Rennie Harlan directed that movie. Damn it.
I have no idea what you're talking
It was like a weird serial killer thing. It was like direct-to-video because it was so bad.
about. Yeah.
It was supposed to be a
Great.
major release, and then they said, maybe we should dump this on video.
Anyway, this episode should be interesting for me because it's like I can't necessarily say, I work there. Mm-hmm. Not at the moment, but I have worked there for a while, and so I can't necessarily talk about everything.
Yeah, but you'll have some insight, I hope.
But a friend of ours, mutual friend, I know him obviously much better than you do, Wyatt Jones, was actually an assistant editor on Zodiac, and so his experience on it was kind of like what you're talking about, where he was asked to do a lot of split screens and composites And I think a lot of the composites he did ended up being final. As an assistant editor, ended up making it into the movie. Because I think they shot this movie on the Viper cam, I believe. So it was just
Sounds
before
right.
Red, I think, and then he shot Social Network after this.
On the Red.
I believe. Am I forgetting some Benjamin Button maybe?
Yeah, that was in
Benjamin
there too.
Button was before Social Network.
Yes.
So I think Benjamin Button was the Red 1 camera. Maybe. That might have been Viper. No, that was Viper also. Not that it matters, but
Well, I've only
they
seen...
definitely didn't have as much room on the Viper camera as they did, say, the Red 1, even though the Red 1 was only a 4K camera.
Is the Viper the one that Fincher is talking about in that documentary where he's like, wait, I can't even watch the footage I just shot, even though it's all digital?
No, that was
What?
a different camera.
Okay.
That was like a...
Where he's like bitching about how, oh, you've taken away the look of film, but given me all of the handicaps of a film camera. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, because they were talking about how the camera mag to record the footage on was basically treated the same as a film mag.
Yeah,
which was,
like that's your
you take it off
camera,
the camera,
original
this big
negatives.
honking thing, and you move it somewhere else.
Yeah.
So basically, he was like, you can't review the footage. Like, what's the point of shooting on video then?
Yeah.
You can't watch it backward then and there, or have it like
instant
immediately
replay
available.
like at the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's kind of silly. I mean, I guess if you're one of those people, and I used to be one of those ones who made the argument that you tend to just set up a camera, shoot a shot or whatever, with film differently than you would video because it's so much more expensive, especially
limited, yeah.
if you're not a studio, especially. You don't have the money to waste film, so you got to get it right. So everyone's a bit more focused and like time is money.
For sure. And I will point out on every TV show I've worked on, directors have a tendency to just let the thing roll.
Yeah.
And they'll go, okay, everybody, back to one, keep it rolling. And we're getting like 10 hours of dailies. That's, you
10
literally
hours of
can't,
dailies in a 13-hour day.
yeah, you cannot watch all the dailies. Like, the editors are under such pressure to just get through it. Mm-hmm. They're not really watching all the dailies. And I think that's fine. Like, once you find a take that works, you're good.
Yeah.
Just keep going. Until, the director will have their few days to come in and do their cut, and they'll probably go, oh, remember we got a different take of this thing. Let's go look at the other ones. And that kind of gives them more time to review the stuff later. But, man, the digital revolution in filmmaking has really just created a whole pile of data to keep track of. Like, I don't even want to know what kind of a job it is at, like, a warehouse full of hard drives where all they do is back up old dailies from TV shows that are off the air now.
Right.
Like, the studio has to have the masters
put it
backed up
somewhere.
in case they revisit it in 20 years for a remake or some shit like that.
Mm-hmm. I wonder about that too, especially now that it's like footage takes up so much space.
Yeah, well, when it's an 8K video file, that's enormous.
Right.
And
Well, yeah, like my film takes up 17 terabytes.
mm-hmm. And you can have all that stuff backed up onto like SSD drives, solid state drives.
Right.
Is that what that stands for?
Sure.
Is it solid state disk drive?
Solid state double drive.
Yeah, double D. Basically, everybody knows that you have to back up your backups.
Right.
So now you're doubling or tripling the amount of space you were using in the first place. It's exponential. It's crazy.
Yeah. I think that's why I'm glad that really shitty hard drives exist, because at least you can back it up like for cheap a couple times on like not as good like Seagates or something.
Right. Like, oh, what do you have against Seagate?
To be honest,
We're gonna get sued.
To be honest, every single hard drive company, no one can perfect it because it's just
right. I mean, every hard drive will fail someday.
Yeah, someday.
You don't know when.
We've definitely seen plenty of G-Techs die at the office.
Yeah,
that's
for sure.
Anyway, this movie's long enough. Why don't we?
Let's get to it.
We'll get into the nitty gritty as soon as we've seen it.
Okay.
Well,
I guess
let's stay. We've both seen this movie. I've seen
yeah.
it a lot.
I've seen it once when it first came out on video. That's when I saw it, and I kind of went, "Oh, that was good."
Yeah.
and that was it. Like, I didn't... Some people talk about this movie like, this is an unsung masterpiece. I can't believe it didn't, win a bunch of Oscars.
Because we were living together when it came out, and I saw it with Nick, Mathis, our other roommate, and Nick and I had kind of the same response to it. It was kind of like, oh, okay. Weren't really sure to what to make of it, because it really doesn't have a classic ending. So it feels like it's building up. I mean, but then you remember that you're tied down to reality because the show's based on a book, based on reality.
Yeah.
And of course, the book could be a number of things. It's made by, Robert Graysmith, who's a cartoonist for the San Francisco Chronicle, I think. Mm-hmm. And he wrote the book, and we're kind of taking his word for everything that occurred and the way it occurred. And of course, you're taking Fincher's version of it and how he pieces it together and everything else. And to be honest, it took a long time for this movie to come around on people. I think BBC did their top 100 films of the era, and I think this was actually ranked pretty damn high.
I guess.
And to be honest, it might be my favorite Fincher film.
I just don't get it. We'll watch it again. We'll see if anything changes. You can explain to me.
See if your experience changes the second time.
It can be. I like Girl with the Dragon Tattoo more than this movie.
Wow.
I really, and that's not to say I like even Dragon Tattoo more than this, because I think it's a fucking good movie.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think it's a good movie.
Well, we'll see. This will be a good experiment on whether or not time changes your opinion of something.
I don't know. I think it comes down to the story.
Sure.
And it's sort of... The way I saw it was just a chronicle of this thing that happened, and they maybe found out some things about who did it, maybe they didn't. And then, I don't know what the fucking point was. I don't know why it needed to be a movie, I guess. But we'll see. Well, maybe I'll like it more.
All right, let's watch it.
Okay.
Dear Editor, this is the murderer of the two teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman and the girl on the 4th of July.
I want you to print this cipher on the front page of your paper.
He wants his code in the afternoon edition.
Graysmith, don't you have a cartoon to finish?
The Zodiac killer has come to San Francisco.
Another letter.
School children make nice targets.
He gave himself a name.
Greek, Morse code, astrological signs. This guy's used them all.
I like killing people because man is the most dangerous animal of all.
How does one do that?
I like puzzles. I do them a lot.
Got any hard suspects?
About 90 an hour. I'm up to around 500.
You got 4 crime scenes, not a single usable print. You can't think of this case in normal police terms.
He's breaking the pattern.
Glenna said you were a cartoonist.
Oh, yeah.
What are you doing at a gun range?
I just want to help.
What are you, some kind of Boy Scout?
Eagle Scout, actually. First class. Paul, I've been thinking.
Oh, God save us all.
There's no evidence, Robert.
What do you mean there's no evidence? You have him seen with the ciphers, the military blueprints, the bloody
All
knife.
circumstantial.
Why do you need to do this?
Because nobody else will.
Dave, you made a mistake! Get away from the window.
Paul, are you okay?
No.
Why'd you do it? You put your face out there for him to see.
Hello? Who is this?
Zodiac was my job. It's not yours.
He's still out there, Dave.
Killing is his compulsion. It drives him. It's in his blood.
Jeez.
What?
Squirrels.
This is the Zodiac speaking.
I have a gun.
I can give you a lift to the service station.
Do you always go around helping people in the night?
I'm not the Zodiac. And if I was, I certainly wouldn't tell you.
Are you sure there's nobody else in the house?
Feel it in the air. It's there everywhere.
I'm glad that we're watching this now, when Mindhunter's just now coming out,
Yeah, when this goes live,
This
it'll
will
be
this will have released
have been
3
online
days
like
after.
4 days, yeah, 3 or 4 days or something.
And it's very much a lot of the reviews I've been reading about Mindhunter are that it's Zodiac the TV show, and it's very similar in style, and it's kind of a, you know, you think about the way directors direct, and most of them don't really let things happen in the frame. They control how it's going to happen in the frame.
Mm-hmm.
Most directors are kind of like, in the way that dialogue can lead you to a point, you know, like writers can kind of lead you and you know where it's going to go because you could feel you're being led along by lines. Just like a director can direct, the camera moves and you can tell where it's going to go. But in a sense, modern day Fincher, you can't really get that out of him.
So he's got a lot of surprises, basically. You can't tell where he's going.
It's the whole, you know, omniscient camera aspect that a lot of people say that he has.
There's one sequence in particular where it kind of feels like it's a montage of people going through the city at night, and we start kind of following one cab as it goes to its destination.
From above.
From above, but it still feels very much like kind of just a montage. We don't know who the driver is. We don't know anything about what's going on. And then the cab stops. We cut inside to see the cab like flick off the meter or whatever. And without any warning, the guy in the back seat shoots him through the back of the head.
Yeah.
Or through the mouth or something like that.
Right.
And we were given no warning that would happen. We didn't know who he was driving.
Who he was or anything.
There was no suspense built up over this particular cab. It just felt like, oh, it's another person out here tonight. And that's really how it is. It was just a random cabbie. He wasn't targeted.
Yeah. And we didn't need to know anything about it, yeah.
Right.
We didn't need to know anything about any of the people who were killed in this movie, who are kind of set up in the same way, although we get to know those characters, like the couple on the lakeside.
Yeah.
We get to know them a little bit more.
They have a little dialogue. The cabbie doesn't get anything.
It's a little... They just feel the boyfriend just feels like, oh, we're gonna get robbed. Just do what they say, you know. All the while he's trying to figure out who this guy is.
I love when he's going like, I could write you a check.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like a way to get his name, maybe.
Right. And he's like,
hey,
where
did
did
you? Yeah.
Where was it you said you're from in Montana? Or whatever he says. Like as if the guy's not gonna notice exactly what he's trying to do.
Yeah. He kind of makes you slap your forehead.
Is that one of the most? Like it takes a lot for me to like cringe when there's murder or violence on screen these days. Because none of it feels like real, and you're not really forced to like suffer through it usually.
Yeah.
I can think of only a few times where I was like sitting there like wincing.
Well,
and when he pulls out the knife and stabs the guy.
Yeah, he gets him a few times before they cut away.
That's
didn't
like one of
bother
the
me
most
that much.
intense. Well, you're just twisted.
I thought the one at the beginning where he was shooting at the kids in the car was much worse.
Shoots through the hand, and you see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like the kid is still alive, and he's trying to hop in the back seat, and he shoots him a couple more times. It's like, oh God, stop it! I think you got him, man.
Yeah, no. And the kid survives.
Yeah.
Oh, after all that, he's shot like I don't know how many times, but he lives.
Yeah.
Same thing with the guy who gets stabbed a bunch of times. Like,
yeah, they were saying he pays more attention to the women. He makes sure he finishes them off.
Yeah.
Sick bastard.
It's it's interesting watching it like in comparison. You know, I doubt anybody will have watched Mindhunter. The type of killer that Zodiac was versus some other serial killers, and like how they. Like, you know, Zodiac, like, focused on the women more maybe when he was killing them, but he didn't, as far as I'm aware, there was no sexual... He may have been driven by sexual rage, but he didn't rape them.
Yeah, they never found semen or...
And they were always had their clothes on and whatever, I believe, but they were just killed. It was almost like he had a hatred for young people, as opposed to... you know, a sexual hatred or something where he wanted to like...
The threats against the school bus full of children.
Yeah. which
he never followed through on, but you never know if
and
he
I think
planned
that's
to.
why the movie very like hints very dramatically like there's no obvious yes it was only one killer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there at times they have, you know, reasonable proof that says, okay, well, this ties this murder and this murder together because we're getting letters from someone who's describing the murder scenes,
Right.
which they could, unless they were a cop or a killer themselves, they would.
But then other letters were written after the stories came out in the paper, so they were kind of going, well, he's trying to take credit for other things. We don't know what's going on.
And it seemed like he did, like, take credit for something that wasn't his.
Yeah.
At least the movie insinuates that. And
the movie is truth. Why would they lie?
Lord knows, every time somebody's, like, out there being a killer, you know, there's definitely plenty of people who say, oh, yeah, I did it.
Well, I mean...
Like...
just like the Vegas shooting a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. Guess who took credit for that? ISIS.
Yeah, right.
Fuck you, ISIS. Like, you didn't have anything to do with this.
And that just makes you question the credibility of any time they claim they...
Like, if they're going to say that for anything, you can't... I mean, shit, I'm not suggesting they were trustworthy at any point in time, but ISIS is... They're ruining their own cred, their street cred.
I mean, we certainly live in a time where, you know, quote unquote fake news is about as hot button a topic as anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's prevalent everywhere. I remember when that Malaysian Airlines airplane disappeared.
Yeah.
In Malaysia, it was
conspiracy nuts from
conspiracy
everywhere.
nuts were everywhere, and like some of the tweets I was reading about like these people being like, "Oh, the U.S. government definitely stole it so they could use the plane later for another 9/11 scale event," like all this stuff, and I'm like, "What?" And then like when the other Malaysian Airlines airplane was shot out of the sky in the Ukraine, everybody was like, "Well, that was the one."
I feel when conspiracy people are saying like the government is doing this to pull a false flag attack later. Motherfucker, they can't even keep a website online.
That's my big argument. It's like
how are they going to pull off this fucking epic scale?
You were expecting
conspiracy?
People to be far more competent as a group than they are.
Right.
And that's why it's like
not everybody's a fucking Green Beret in the government. Okay, they're just office workers.
Yes, the government has set up and done conspiracy level events and types of things.
Mm-hmm.
They've admitted to certain things, but always on a
weird
much
medical
smaller,
research things.
Much smaller scale. You know, never drastically
but
huge.
Even
I mean,
like
we're getting a little off the topic.
We are, but like even something like Bay of Pigs was supposed to be a big secret. Everybody knows about that now.
Right.
Years later,
right.
Like it's not they're not capable of these things. I just whatever.
Do you think, at least from the movie's point of view, do you feel the movie presents a case? What case do you think the movie is presenting? Is it against Arthur Lee Allen as the killer, or is it more? Because Fincher always says about Zodiac that it's about the people's lives who this killing changes, or like these killings changes the lives of Gray Smith, and all the people from there.
That's kind of funny because I don't get that out of the movie at all. That's kind of why I like it. Like I mentioned before we watched the movie, I was kind of, it's really good, but what's the big deal? You know, I like it a lot more now. That I've seen it again, but the movie is not about human beings. I don't think the movie is about their lives. Mm-hmm. I think Robert Graysmith's life would have fallen apart regardless, even without the Zodiac. Like the movie does nothing to establish any kind of chemistry or real. Like a loving relationship between him and his wife.
Right.
So that's sort of a foregone conclusion. He's a weird guy. They call him retard at work.
Right.
Behind his back. And I just didn't see that working out at all. They had a weird first date where he was
basically
on the phone the whole night with someone else.
I feel like it's a date that never ended.
Yeah.
Because it's how it started with.
She just got on board and didn't like where they ended up.
She got on board and he was in the middle of trying to figure out the case in the first date, and they spend all night waiting for a phone call from Robert Downey Jr.'s character who went to Riverside. who didn't realize that Riverside.
It's like a 6-hour drive.
Yeah, he's like, oh, I'll just drive to Riverside, not realizing that from San Francisco,
San Fran,
Riverside's like 6 or 7 hours. Like it's, and they think that he might have gotten jumped or something down there, but
right.
Yeah, it's
like I don't think the movie's really about people, despite what Fincher says. I don't think he succeeded in that, in my opinion. The movie, it's a lot of exposition. Like everything is just recreating history in this case, and you're bombarded with so many names and dates, and you got to keep track of like what happened when and what the evidence means and stuff like that. It's that's what the movie's about, and that's why it feels kind of cold and detached to me, because the people are not really important to the story. Like there isn't even a story; it's just a plot. We see this investigation happen.
We're not seeing any of the other things that are happening in their lives.
Yeah, like we can see
only seeing
Robert Downey Jr. is an alcoholic, but I don't know why the Zodiac did that to him, or how the Zodiac did that to him. He threatened him publicly, I guess.
Yeah, in the movie it insinuates that from the moment that the Zodiac mentioned him by name in a letter, that he
was an unwanted celebrity.
He suddenly became not only was he unwanted, and like he, in some of Downey Jr.'s articles in the paper, in the Chronicle, he wrote specifically that he might be a homosexual.
Yeah, latent homosexual.
The Zodiac killer might be a latent homosexual. So he's taking jabs at the Zodiac killer. And
talk shit, get hit.
And of course the Zodiac killer doesn't like that. So it's kind of funny. Like, you never really feel like any of the characters are unsafe except for one scene, which is a awesome scene. And anytime I mention Zodiac to people, people go, "Oh man, the basement scene."
Yeah, that's what the thing I remembered before too, the most. And when we started watching the movie, I kind of had a false memory. I was going, "Wait, how does Arthur Lee Allen? He doesn't have a basement. He's living in this trailer. What's going on?" And I got all the people confused. Like the guy in the basement was not even really.
He knew a different guy.
Yeah.
So there was another suspect beyond. I forget the guy's name, but he was another suspect beyond Arthur Lee Allen, who was a projectionist at a theater, who showed.
Yeah, like they compare the handwriting on the poster that this guy supposedly
maybe he
wrote.
Designed the movie posters or something.
Yeah, but then he goes to check out the poster in some guy's weird basement, and he's like, "No, I made those posters." And then suddenly,
oh my God, is he with the killer?
And he's hearing people upstairs and stuff.
And watching the scene, it's funny because Jake Gyllenhaal is basically just shitting himself in the scene, but it's almost it seems really clear that the guy who is being presumed at that moment to be the possible killer, he's also seemingly aware of the fact that that Jake Gyllenhaal knows this, and he's totally just fucking with him.
Yeah. So as creepy as that scene is, and as much as I wouldn't want to be in that situation,
dark comedy.
Like that guy in the basement isn't actually all that threatening.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't supposed to be the suspect anyway.
Right.
The movie's pretty clear. It hates Arthur Lee Allen. It's going after him.
Is this a masterpiece?
No.
Or a work of genius?
It's very, very good. That's the most I can say. A work of genius? Jesus Christ.
That's what every time I hear Zodiac, I think it's hilarious because I mean, like I said, I personally think that this is my favorite Fincher movie. Of all his movies, which is interesting to say because I wouldn't say it's his best told film.
I think it's your favorite, even if it's not the best. It's your favorite.
It's the most well constructed.
Okay.
Of all the movies he's put together, this feels like a complete world on itself. Like there's nothing about the design of it, the way the characters are, everything about the way this movie's built feels so well done. To me, that's what's genius about it. It's not necessarily the fact that the story could be more enticing.
I would say it is technically perfect.
Yeah. Whereas, something like Seven that's not technically perfect, but still looks gorgeous and
yeah. Oh, it was shot on film? Give me a break.
shot in L.A. and it's raining in every single scene.
We could use some of that.
I had always heard rumors in the office. I think it was my supervisor at work, Peter, said that there was some point where they're having production meetings. And I don't know if it was for Seven or something, and they had been going over these sets for weeks or whatever. And then one day, like a couple days before shooting, David came in and said, "Oh yeah, it's raining in every scene." And by the way,
thanks, Dave.
There's rain in everything. And like that's the kind of thing, like when you're shooting in downtown LA, and like that's one thing I do appreciate about David's earlier works, especially. He always set his movies in places of question. Like
you can't tell.
Where generic city number 1 is. I always thought that Seven was based in Chicago.
I always thought it was in New York.
It had this feel of, to me, something different because it's always raining, and yet it's all shot in L.A.
Fight Club's the same way.
The game,
never say where
you can kind of tell is in San Francisco just because it feels like San Francisco.
Yeah, I think, don't they have the skyline in there?
I think so. Yeah.
I don't know.
And obviously Benjamin Button is Louisiana, but and Alien 3 is clearly Detroit. So it's like, yeah. Anyway, so I guess I agree with you in the sense, like technically it is a perfect film, but I understand completely why people don't, aren't like in love with this movie, because it's not like you can just sit down and watch it.
Yeah.
I mean, I try to. I'll put it on. I usually watch up until the lakeside killings, which is honestly only like 20 minutes into the film. Anyway.
There's nothing inherently enjoyable about the movie, unless you're watching it to admire how well it's made, or if you find the story of the Zodiac investigation very interesting. That can be enjoyable, but it's
people did not love this movie when it first came out.
Like critically, I think it did very well, but audiences, were just not totally into it. I think Robert Downey Jr. is doing his Tony Stark. He's got a lot of jokes, but I think Jake Gyllenhaal is even the funnier one in his responses to Robert Downey Jr. The way they interact together is kind of cool.
And we had talked about that, I think, before, like that David said publicly that it wasn't necessarily when they were making the movie, he felt like he might have given Gyllenhaal a bit too much trouble at times and made him do more takes, and that frustrated the other actors. And I think there was something with Downey Jr. where Downey Jr. got mad at Fincher at some point where he felt like he was being too hard on Jake.
Yeah,
Gyllenhaal.
He had to kind of stand up and say, like, quit pushing the kid around.
Yeah, because, Downey Jr. is someone who's enough. Downey Jr. is someone who shows up and knows his lines like immediately, no matter what. And Jake is more of one of those actors who kind of shows up, may not know the lines verbatim, but is like trying to figure it out as they go. And there's a craft to both of those ways to coming to work. But I think it frustrates someone who might be as articulate and anal about things as David is.
Yeah.
But even David said afterwards, like, you can feel like you're not getting a performance from somebody on set, but then you come together and you cut it all together into a movie, and suddenly it's all there, and you're like, wow, that's performance. And he said Zodiac was the movie that taught him that.
Yeah.
As a director, that you can feel like you're not getting something, but at the end of the day, it's that's why Jake Gyllenhaal's one of the if he wasn't a good actor or didn't give out performances that played well over the arc of a film, he just wouldn't be getting cast anymore.
Right.
But he's still getting cast. I'm sure he's learned a ton since this in 2007 or 2008 when this came out. But.
7, yeah. And just the nature of the movie, when everything is based in fact and it's a series of conversations between people talking about who did what and when and where, if they kind of flub any one of those things, if they say the wrong year,
right?
Like if they didn't perfectly memorize all that stuff, then they have to do it again, and they have to do it again until it is perfect.
And it's not to say this movie is perfect. I think there are a lot of flaws with the timelines and stuff. That from what I've read, not everything, and I think part of the book was even proven to be wrong.
Oh,
after they made the movie, or something Graysmith had not. He had over. I don't know. I'm walking on slanderous territory here because I just feel like on hearsay I remember hearing some
story about him getting something wrong.
Yeah,
I wonder if the book would be worth reading after seeing the movie. It's almost 3 hours long. I think they kind of cover it all.
I just crammed it all in there.
Yeah, what? I don't know.
I mean,
would you get anything else out of reading the book?
If it was a case of
place.
One of these true crime things that they have on HBO or Netflix these days, where a case is actually further solved from the point that you have this piece of media put out in the world that incites more people to be interested about it. And then suddenly you have people actually discovering more, or people were sitting on a piece of information that they didn't necessarily feel like would go anywhere because they felt maybe a case was dead. I would feel at this point it'd be kind of pointless, because if nothing came out of the craze when this came out, if there was one, I feel like cases just seem to die again, which was kind of the whole point of the end of the movie. Is
the final
people
card
got on
says
with their life.
He never got any more heavy breathing calls after Arthur Lee Allen died.
Yeah,
and he died right before they were going to question him again.
It seemed pretty obvious the way everything that kept happening to Arthur Lee Allen, based around the times where he was about to be interviewed or something. He seemed like he had a guilty conscience of something, whether or not it was being the Zodiac, or if he was convicted of
he gets
touching
another
children
job.
at schools. He was a teacher who clearly had.
He was a gym teacher, right?
Yeah, and I feel like I heard an argument about that recently in regards to Mindhunter. Somebody brought up the Zodiac Killer, and someone said that he thought. Oh no! It was the guy who plays Arthur Lee Allen, the actor.
Mm-hmm. Also the clown from American Horror Story.
He was talking about Zodiac, and he said, "I don't actually think that he is the Zodiac Killer." And he said only in one scene was he told to act guilty, and that's the scene at the end of the movie where Jake Gyllenhaal sees him in the Ace Hardware store or whatever, and
hey, can I help you?
That was the only scene that David said, okay, this is the one time we're going to see it in your eyes.
Yeah, and it does work as a way of directing him, because the whole rest of the movie, you're sitting there just like the cops going I know you did it, you fuck, I know you did it, I know you did it. But everything he says on its own seems perfectly reasonable.
Well,
except for the bloody knives in the trunk.
Reasonable, except for the fact that everything he says also is damn.
Yeah.
You have a watch made by the company Zodiac
with the same symbol that's on the Zodiac letters.
That's on all the letters, but anyway, the actor was saying he didn't actually personally believe that Arthur Lee Allen was the murderer. He felt like his only crime was that he was a pedophile.
Mm. Which is enough.
Which is more than enough, to throw the guy in jail. Anyway, however, they didn't have that evidence, and he was in jail because of that at one point. He was a teacher who touched kids, and is a bad dude in general. But, at least the actor, for whatever his word counts for.
I assume he did more research than we have into this
he said he
subject.
had, and he may be right in that sense. He said, and he had a reasoning for it. He's like, if that's what you're into, you're not going to go kill people. But like I said before, it wasn't a lust-inspired murdering. It wasn't lust-inspired murder. It didn't seem like. He would just kill anybody.
According to his letters, he liked killing people because it was so much fun, better than hunting game in the forest.
Yeah, and there are people who are just fucking crazy, and
I
feel like I've met a few who I would definitely
there's
not
another
put it past them.
Just real quick, I forget the name of it now, but there's another movie with John Cusack and Nicolas Cage about I don't want to say similar string of murders, but it was something up in Alaska, I think, in a snowy region anyway. This guy, he lived out in the middle of nowhere, and he owned his own plane, little like twin propeller. I don't know what kind of plane it was, and he would bring prostitutes out into the frozen woods and hunt them with a rifle.
Jesus.
And I forget if he had a overtly sexual reason behind that. I don't know if he did anything to them before or after, but it was like Zodiac, most dangerous game kind of a thing. Like, that was how he got his rocks off.
And that seems like a pretty common thing too. Like, I feel like I've heard of that, happening.
You find
times.
somebody who no one will miss,
Right.
Some prostitute. No one will know.
No one will miss them, and yeah. I mean, there's
How to Get Away with Murder 101.
Serial killers span such a crazy amount of, like...
Back to H.H. Holmes. The guy with the weird murder house in Chicago during the World's Fair.
Wasn't he like one of the first ones?
He was one of the first Americans.
Is that the Devil in the White City or something?
Yes.
Yeah. The first American ones outside of, obviously there's pre-him, there's Jack the Ripper in England.
Some people think he was Jack the Ripper. I think that's been disproven.
Yeah,
but
that'd be interesting. He just caught a boat over here and just started killing it again.
I wonder what brought about serial killing in humanity.
Drugs.
I
think drugs.
Gonna say mastermind. What's the fucking Mindhunters? What does your show get into that?
It doesn't really, but it does. The things that it does comment on is that it's like 98% men. That it's a male problem, and it's usually white men. And of course, it's not necessarily just limited to them, but it almost always involves sex or women or being raised by their mother, or being beaten by their father or something. It almost always involves the parents, bad situations you grew up in. But yeah, that's a good question, because it's like people were children were raised much more harsh back in the day than they are now.
Yeah, even 20 years ago.
There's a reason why everyone, when they hit like 80 years old, they were just mean old bastards.
Because the world was not kind to them.
They were chiseled from iron, and like...
They didn't have Twitter to complain about.
They had, a lot of people say that's more of a personality than people have now, because people they're so malleable because they have it kind of easy, so you don't stand up for your beliefs usually.
Everybody's a tumbling tumbleweed.
Everybody's a tumbleweed. Everybody can be kind of a pushover, and when someone tells you don't do something, typically you can tend to kind of shrink back and not do it.
Yeah.
But who knows if there were? I mean, people were certainly, there were murderers back in the day, for sure.
I guess like criminal investigation tactics have changed so much over the years. Like, maybe they had no way of knowing if the same person killed 20 other people before.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, and that's something in Mindhunter, they actually, for the first time, they coined the term serial killer, because they were calling them, at least in the first episode or two, they call them sequence killers. And they were like, well, that doesn't really make sense for some cases. Like, what exactly does that mean? And serial is basically another way of saying sequence anyway.
Right.
But, yeah, I think they're trying to just figure out like why people do certain fucked up things. Like, I'm not spoiling anything about Mindhunter when in the second episode they're trying to get the Manson to interview him so that they can start this whole process of building this profiling, criminal profiling, like so they can figure out how to predict who these people are going to be, or so that they can stop it.
He's the template for serial killer.
Right, which is funny because he technically didn't kill anyone.
Right.
He tried to. He shot somebody. Or I think he shot somebody at a doorstep, and the guy lived.
But he influenced his weird followers to do it.
But the first person they're able to talk to is this guy called Edmund Kemper. And in the 70s, when he was a kid, he killed his grandparents. And he was put in juvie for a while until basically he was proven that he was fine. It was okay.
Okay.
So
Passed
he's
all their
released
tests.
back out. Yeah, right. So of course, naturally, he goes out into the world, and he's been in, juvie for 10 years or whatever. And he goes back, and they called him the co-ed killer because he killed all these women from the college, like where his mom was like a counselor or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And he describes his mother as someone who is very matriarchal and very, very, like she just doesn't like men. At least that's how he describes her. And so he blames her basically for all his problems. But it doesn't explain why he would cut off the heads of his victims and have sex with their face, like with a severed head. Like, and he did this to his mother. Like, she came home. She came home one night and was like, "I can't get a date because you killed our grandparents and everyone knows like who you are and that you're in this house." And like, so I haven't had sex in like 2 years or whatever. And so he cuts her head off and has sex with her. And then, at least in the show, but in his real life interviews, he's talking about it. He's like, "Well, I killed her, and then I was like, well, there, now you've had sex." Like, how fucked up, and it was never about.
He thought it was funny at the time.
It was never
I'm sure.
about men at all. He was always like very friendly and funny with men. It wasn't a. It was like he was very buddy. Cops liked him. He had tried to be a policeman, of course. Go figure.
Yeah.
And he actually knew several cops before he went and killed all those people. And he ended up turning himself in ultimately.
So they didn't even catch him.
They didn't even catch him. He just called in and was like, because I think his anxiety was so high from being caught. He was like, I'm just going to turn myself in.
Just like John Doe from Seven.
Yeah.
He turned himself in.
But anyway, I mean, that's like, you can't even, the Zodiac, terrorized a whole region,
The whole state, yeah.
Kemper was basically in the same area-ish. It was like Santa Cruz. I guess he was, well, was it Santa Cruz? I don't know, somewhere. But California has an extremely high number of serial killers too, which kind of made me, and it was all kind of around the same time, which kind of made me believe it was drug-related, potentially. But Kemper didn't strike me as someone who was a drug user.
Too many magic mushrooms. It'll turn you into a maniac.
I think people act crazy in the heat. Of course, that doesn't explain someone like old Leatherface there up in Wisconsin or wherever.
Dahmer?
No. Well, Dahmer too, but
like the psycho.
No,
guy.
it was like one of the first guys in like the early days.
I can't remember his name now, but it's what Norman Bates and Psycho was based on, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, where they went into his house and everybody just described him as off and weird. And this woman went disappearing from the local bar. I think she owned the bar or something. And then
time to kill all the autistic people, right?
They found her, but then they opened a chest and it was full of skin.
Yeah, just like folded up
skin and like people's faces. And like he would just wear it and walk around the house and act like he was cooking for his mother who was dead.
They had lampshades made out of faces, all kinds of shit.
Can you imagine being someone walking into that and just like, especially when you're a small town cop like that, and like,
yeah,
you're probably used to like pulling kittens out of trees, and then suddenly
I think he even had a belt made out of ears.
Ed Gein,
yeah,
that's what we're talking about. Yeah, right. Like, how did people get to that point? Like
they do it the first time. Did they work in a
slaughterhouse or something, and they
right.
just were used to slaughtering like mammals? Like,
I just wonder if it's like the first time they did it, they got away with it, and they said, "Oh, let's try it again." Got away with that one too.
In Ed Gein's case, he didn't seem like he understood that he had done anything wrong. Like, says a different kind of level of like, oh, he thinks this is like normal behavior or whatever.
Right. Time for a lobotomy, sir.
So I don't know. It's, who knows.
On that note, let's go piss on Arthur Lee Allen's grave.
Yes.
Wherever that is.
We are running a little long, aren't we? But hey, it's a Zodiac commentary.
Right.
So,
it's
we could
super
be a little
long.
long-winded.
We've had longer. This is only 36 minutes. Come on.
On top of the first part?
The first 2 minutes.
There wasn't a 20? Something like that. It's been a while. Anyway, all right. Well, that's another podcast for the hell with this.
The hell with this.
And we will see you guys next week, unless we get murdered.
Or our jobs murder us, which happens.
Which probably will happen sooner.